set up a personalization group called AppSense Managed. If I right click in there, I can actually do some personalization analysis. If I hit display, what we're actually doing now is connecting into the user's personalization for each of the users. So here we see we've got personalization for the accountant and personalization for the engineer. Comparing this to conventional methods of having a roaming profile, imagine this being where you're storing your users enter user.dat. Here, rather than having all the user personalization stored in one folder or one file, if I click into the account settings, and as you can see from the size of the desktop settings, they're less than 70 kilobytes in size. So it's going to be nice and fast to get this user logged onto the desktop. The same thing applies. Why actually load all the user personalization for all the applications that user might use when the user might not actually launch that application? So here we're streaming down the user's personalization as and when the applications are launched and if the application is launched. So getting the user logged onto the desktop as quickly as possible. As I mentioned, these files are all going to be stored in the database. So because we are actually only managing small registry files, we can actually start taking snapshots of the user's personalization. By default, Environment Manager will take snapshots, running snapshots of the rolling week. So it'll take snapshots Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and it'll overwrite Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Because we don't have time to wait overnight, if I actually take a manual snapshot now of the user personalization for the accountant, I can take a snapshot of the user's Microsoft Word settings simply by right-clicking and setting Archive Now. What we've done now is actually taken a snapshot of that personalization at this time. So imagine that's something that was been done on a Friday afternoon or Friday evening. If then I go back to my user's desktop, my user is still logged on. Let's say they come in on a Monday morning and they launch the application, and then they go into their application and start making some changes. So they make the change to the application, change the background setting to blue, change the custom dictionary to something random, and then basically mess their application personalization up. So conventional methods of actually resolving that in the past would be to, if the user was lucky enough to be able to stay logged onto the desktop, then that's great. But if the user corrupt the settings so that they couldn't even log onto the desktop, the user would have to stay logged off while the engineers rebuilt the actual profile. Now this would be hours downtime for the user and also hours wasted time for the administrator. In this scenario, using Environment Manager, all we need to do is ask the user to close the application in question, the problem application. So we ask our users to close Microsoft Word. The support engineer goes back into the snapshot area, so goes back into the personalization analysis, and it can ask the user, when were you happy with your personalization? Well, my user could say, I was happy with it yesterday, 2 days ago when I was working, or luckily enough they've got a snapshot today at 1:30. So we'll roll back to that one. So you simply, as an engineer, right click, roll back to this archive and click continue. The applications are rolled back successfully. Jump back onto that user session. Again, the user's not had to log off. They could have been working on any of the other applications as they were waiting for this to be done. They run Microsoft Word again, and they see all that personalization is back to how it was. So whereas we were waiting before with downtime of anything from a number of hours to half a day to actually rebuild the user's profile, now this is something that can be done by the administrator in a couple of seconds, just simply right-clicking. So it's all well and good having this managing the user profile with the mandatory profile, having the personalization server capture the user's personalization, but how easy is it to actually migrate the users from their current roaming profiles or current methods of maybe local profiles to actually capturing their personalization and moving them into AppSense Managed? Well, if I go to the settings within the console, in the personalization side of the console, what you can see there is we actually have a migrate existing profiles tick box. What we do there is if we tick that box, your users can then log on to the AppSense Managed device or the AppSense Managed server, the AppSense Managed desktop, using their conventional method of actually preserving their personalization. So maybe logging onto that terminal server with AppSense, with Environment Manager installed, with their roaming profile. What we do then is Environment Manager and the personalization server captures any of the user personalization as the user runs their applications. So a user will run Microsoft Word, will capture the personalization for that application that's currently in their roaming profile, and then also capture their desktop settings when the user logs off. So we'll leave that running for probably a week, just basically so we're capturing all the applications being launched once and closed once to capture that personalization for each of the users. And then, let's say on the weekend, after you've captured all the user personalization, untick the migrate existing profiles, point all your users onto a mandatory profile, and then when they log on the Monday morning, they've still got the background settings of the children, they've still got all the personalization for Word, XYZ applications that you want to give them access to. We also have in here the processes, the discover processing, manage all processes tick boxes. So there's two ways of actually capturing or picking out which applications you want to allow your users to personalize. Because we're using the mandatory profile, anything that you ignore from the personalization server will just revert back to the mandatory profile settings every time the user logs on or every time the application is launched. If you know which applications you want to allow your user to be able to personalize, you can simply list them as a whitelist into the whitelisted area by just pointing out the actual executable file name. What you can also do is, if you want to have more of a discovery process, we have the tick box which is discover all processes. What that will actually do is when your users are logging onto their desktops, they run all their applications, we can actually report back which executables are being run in that user's session, and then you can simply right click on the application that's been discovered and turn that into a managed or whitelisted application. We also have the ability to have an offline mode. Now this is mainly for offline users, so for laptop users. Basically with offline mode ticked, what we're doing there is user personalization is usually stored in an AppSense virtual cache. So a personalization cache. We're intercepting the writes to the registry and storing those in the personalization cache, which is then synchronized back up with the personalization server. Now in offline mode, obviously if the user was to log off their desktop, disconnect their desktop and reconnect to the desktop, reconnect or log back onto their laptop, what we do with offline mode is we preserve that personalization cache. So we don't delete the personalization cache like we would do with offline mode unticked. So when the user logs off their laptop in the office, logs back onto the laptop back at home, let's say, what they'll find is that personalization cache is still there, so that personalization is still there that they've made in their previous session. Any changes they make within that whilst being offline is preserved in the cache. When they log back onto the corporate domain, then that personalization is synced up back with the server. So that's an end to the actual demonstration. If I go back to my slide deck now, just to give a bit of a recap on what we've seen. As we mentioned before, the Environment Manager handles the personalization and the policy side of the product suite. We're there to actually apply the different parts of the policy. So we have new trigger points, so we have, as well as log on, log off for the user, we have process start, process stopped, session disconnect, reconnect, and others which we can take advantage of those and apply policy on demand. So not wasting time applying policy, log on, get that user logged onto the desktop as quickly as possible, and then apply the policy on demand. We then have the personalization side. So similar method, rather than actually applying all the user's personalization for all the applications that user might use when they're logging on, let's only load the minimum amount of personalization, so things like desktop background, mouse settings, keyboard settings, etc. And then when the applications launch that the users are using, that's when we stream down the personalization.